The fluorescent lights of Jefferson Elementary's multipurpose room flickered overhead as parents shuffled into their plastic chairs, coffee cups in hand and skeptical expressions on their faces. What started as a routine parent-teacher meeting was about to become something nobody in Millbrook Township would ever forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell smoothed down her navy blazer and checked her watch one final time. 6:47 p.m. The parent meeting would begin in 30 minutes, and she could already hear the murmur of voices echoing from the multipurpose room down the hallway. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered her lesson plans, student portfolios, and the carefully prepared presentation she'd spent weeks crafting. At 26, Sarah was younger than most of the parents she'd be facing tonight. Fresh out of graduate school with her master's in elementary education, she moved to Millbrook 6 weeks ago to take over Mrs. Henderson's 4th grade class. The veteran teacher had suffered a heart attack just 3 weeks into the school year, leaving 32 students and their concerned parents in a state of uncertainty. Principal Davidson had been clear during Sarah's hurried interview. The Henderson situation has everyone on edge. These parents trusted Martha for 15 years. You'll need to prove yourself quickly. Sarah had accepted the challenge eagerly. She'd graduated summa cum laude, completed her student teaching at an inner-city school in Detroit, and spent 2 summers volunteering at educational camps for underprivileged children. She was ready for anything, or so she thought. The past 6 weeks had been a whirlwind of lesson planning, getting to know her students, and trying to maintain the classroom culture Mrs. Henderson had established. The children had warmed to her quickly enough. Little Emma Rodriguez brought her hand-drawn pictures every morning. Marcus Thompson, initially shy and withdrawn, now eagerly participated in class discussions. Even the more challenging students, like Tyler Walsh, had begun to respect her authority. But tonight wasn't about the children. Tonight was about their parents. Sarah walked down the hallway, her heels clicking against the polished linoleum. The walls were decorated with colorful student artwork and motivational posters, but she barely noticed them. Her mind was focused on the presentation she'd prepared, the questions she might face, and the impression she needed to make. As she approached the multipurpose room, she could hear distinct voices rising above the general chatter. She paused outside the door, recognizing some of the more vocal parents from the brief encounter she'd had during pickup and drop-off times. "I'm telling you, Rebecca, my Austin's grades have already dropped since she started," came the sharp voice of Diana Walsh, Tyler's mother. Mrs. Henderson would never have assigned such complicated homework to 9-year-olds. "She's too young." "That's the problem," replied Rebecca Foster, whose daughter Claire was one of Sarah's brightest students. "What does someone barely out of college know about managing a classroom full of kids?" Sarah's stomach tightened. She'd expected some skepticism, but hearing it firsthand was more challenging than she'd anticipated. She took a deep breath and reminded herself of her training. Every teacher faced criticism. The key was to remain professional, confident, and focused on the children's best interests. She pushed open the door and stepped into the room. The conversation didn't stop immediately, but she noticed several parents glance in her direction. The room was set up with rows of chairs facing a small podium where she would present. A projector screen had been pulled down, and her laptop was already connected and ready. "Good evening, everyone," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, and I'm excited to meet with all of you tonight." The chatter gradually died down as parents took their seats. Sarah counted approximately 40 adults scattered throughout the room, a strong turnout that she hoped indicated genuine interest in their children's education rather than just skepticism about her abilities. She recognized several faces from school events and brief hallway encounters. There was Maria Rodriguez, Emma's mother, who worked double shifts at the local hospital but always found time to volunteer for school activities. James Thompson sat in the back, Marcus's father, who'd been nothing but supportive during their few phone conversations about his son's progress. But Sarah's attention was drawn to a cluster of parents sitting in the front 3 rows. Diana Walsh occupied the center seat of the front row, her arms crossed and her expression stern. To her right sat Rebecca Foster, equally rigid in her posture. Brad Mitchell, no relation to Sarah despite sharing her surname, had claimed the seat directly to Diana's left. His son Kevin was known for being disruptive in class. Though Sarah had been making progress with him, these 3 parents had formed what Sarah privately thought of as the Resistance Committee. They'd been the most vocal critics of her teaching methods, the most frequent visitors to Principal Davidson's office, and the most persistent in their demands for updates on their children's progress. "Before we begin," Sarah said, moving to stand behind the podium, "I want to acknowledge that this transition has been difficult for everyone. Mrs. Henderson was a beloved teacher, and I know many of you have concerns about the changes in your children's classroom experience." She paused, making eye contact with various parents around the room. "I also want you to know that your children's education and well-being are my top priorities. I've spent the past 6 weeks getting to know each student individually, understanding their learning styles and building on the strong foundation Mrs. Henderson established." Diana Walsh raised her hand, not waiting to be called upon. "Ms. Mitchell, my son Tyler has been complaining about the increased homework load. Mrs. Henderson never assigned projects that required parental involvement on weeknight evenings." Sarah nodded respectfully. "I understand your concern, Mrs. Walsh. The project Tyler is referring to is actually designed to be completed independently by the students over the course of 2 weeks. The guidelines I sent home specifically stated that parental assistance should be limited to encouragement and ensuring the child has necessary supplies." "That's not what my son said," Deanna replied, her voice carrying a sharp edge. "He said the instructions were confusing and that other children were getting help from their parents. I'd be happy to discuss Tyler's specific situation with you after the meeting," Sarah offered. "But I think you'll find that the project aligns with 4th grade state standards and is designed to help students develop independent research skills." Rebecca Foster leaned forward. "Ms. Mitchell, with all due respect, you've been teaching for exactly 6 weeks. Mrs. Henderson had 15 years of experience with these children's families. Don't you think it's presumptuous to change her established methods so quickly?" Sarah felt the room's energy shift. Other parents were now paying closer attention, some nodding in agreement with Rebecca's question, others looking uncomfortable with the confrontational tone. "Mrs. Foster, I appreciate your concern," Sarah replied, maintaining her professional composure. "I haven't changed any of Mrs. Henderson's core classroom management techniques or academic standards. The assignments I've given have been reviewed by Principal Davidson and align with the curriculum Mrs. Henderson was following." Brad Mitchell spoke up from his seat. "My son Kevin said you made him stay after class last week. Mrs. Henderson never used detention as a punishment." Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. Kevin Mitchell had been disrupting other students during reading time, making it impossible for his classmates to concentrate. After 2 warnings, she'd asked him to stay for 10 minutes after class to discuss his behavior, hardly what anyone would call detention. "Mr. Mitchell, I asked Kevin to stay briefly so we could discuss some classroom behavior issues. It wasn't a punishment. It was an opportunity for us to talk about how he could better contribute to the learning environment." "You should have called me first," Brad insisted. "I don't appreciate my son being singled out by someone who doesn't understand his personality." The room was becoming increasingly tense. Sarah could see other parents shifting uncomfortably in their seats, some checking their phones, others whispering to their neighbors. This wasn't how she'd envisioned her first major parent meeting. "I understand everyone has concerns," Sarah said, trying to regain control of the situation. "That's exactly why I've prepared a comprehensive presentation about our classroom goals." teaching methods, and the progress your children have made over the past 6 weeks. I think you'll be pleased with what we've accomplished together." She moved to her laptop and opened her presentation. The first slide appeared on the screen. "Building on Excellence, Our Classroom Journey Together." But as Sarah began to advance to the next slide, Deanna Walsh stood up abruptly. "Ms. Mitchell, before you show us your slideshow, I think the parents in this room deserve some honest answers about your qualifications and your plans for our children's education." Sarah paused, her finger hovering over the laptop's touchpad. The room had gone completely silent. Even the parents who'd been having side conversations were now focused on the unfolding confrontation. "I'm happy to answer any questions about my qualifications, Mrs. Walsh. As I mentioned in my introduction letter, I have a master's degree in elementary education from the University of Michigan, and I completed my student teaching at—" "Student teaching," Diana interrupted, her voice dripping with disdain. "So you practiced on other people's children before you started practicing on ours." Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she maintained her professional demeanor. All teachers complete student teaching as part of their certification process. "Mrs. Walsh, it's a supervised experience where—" "Supervised," Rebecca Foster chimed in, standing to join Diana. "Which means you needed supervision. Which means you weren't qualified to teach independently." "That's not accurate," Sarah replied, her voice remaining steady despite the increasing hostility. "Student teaching is a collaborative learning experience." What we want to know," Brad Mitchell said, now standing as well, "is why Principal Davidson hired someone with no real experience when there were probably dozens of qualified teachers available. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." The three parents had effectively formed a wall of opposition in front of Sarah. She could see other parents in the room looking increasingly uncomfortable, some appearing sympathetic to her position, others seeming to side with the vocal critics. "I was hired because of my qualifications, my interview performance, and my commitment to providing excellent education for your children," Sarah answered firmly. "Principal Davidson conducted a thorough hiring process, and I'm confident in my ability to—" "Confident," Diana Walsh repeated mockingly. "You're confident. Well, I'm confident that my son deserves better than to be part of your on-the-job training." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd faced challenges before: difficult students, critical supervising teachers, demanding coursework, but she'd never experienced such direct, personal attacks on her professional competence. "Mrs. Walsh, I understand you're concerned about Tyler's education, but I assure you that every decision I make in the classroom is based on sound educational principles and the individual needs of my students." "Individual needs," Brad Mitchell scoffed. "Like keeping my son after class without consulting his parents? Like assigning homework that requires engineering degrees to understand?" "I never assigned homework requiring engineering degrees, Mr. Mitchell. If you're referring to the Simple Machines project, it's designed for 4th grade comprehension levels and—" "Don't lecture us about comprehension levels," Rebecca Foster interrupted. "You've been teaching for 6 weeks. We've been parenting these children for 9 and 10 years. Sarah felt the situation spiraling beyond her control. The three parents had clearly coordinated their approach, and they were determined to undermine her authority in front of the entire group. She needed to regain control of the meeting while maintaining her professionalism. "I respect your experience as parents," Sarah said, her voice carrying new authority. "But I'm asking you to respect my experience as an educator. I've spent 6 years studying child development, learning theory, and classroom management. I've worked with diverse student populations and 6 years of school." Diana Walsh cut her off. "We're talking about 6 years of sitting in classrooms, reading textbooks, and writing papers. That's not the same as real experience with real children. Sarah felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. These parents weren't interested in her qualifications or her presentation. They'd come to this meeting with the sole purpose of humiliating her and undermining her position. Mrs. Walsh, I think we should focus on your son's actual progress rather than attacking. Diana's voice rose sharply. You think asking legitimate questions about your qualifications is attacking you? Maybe that's the problem. You're too sensitive to handle criticism. The room erupted in murmurs as parents began taking sides. Sarah could see the meeting completely falling apart, her carefully planned presentation forgotten, her professional reputation under assault. But what none of them knew, what Sarah had never felt the need to mention in her introduction letters or interviews, was that her path to teaching hadn't been entirely traditional. Before deciding to pursue education, she'd spent 4 years training in Kyokushin karate, earning her black belt and competing in regional tournaments. She'd learned discipline, mental toughness, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Those skills were about to become very relevant. As Diana Walsh continued her verbal assault, Sarah stood straighter, her hands relaxed at her sides, her breathing controlled. The scared young teacher who'd entered the room 30 minutes ago was being replaced by someone much more formidable. The real confrontation was just beginning. Sarah took a measured breath and made a decision. She would not allow these 3 parents to derail the meeting entirely. Other families deserved to hear about their children's progress, and she had important information to share. I appreciate everyone's passion about their children's education, she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs in the room. However, I'd like to proceed with the presentation I've prepared. There are many positive developments to share about your children's growth over the past 6 weeks. She clicked to the next slide, which displayed a colorful chart showing class-wide improvement in reading comprehension scores. As you can see, 92% of students have shown measurable improvement in their reading levels since. We don't want to see your charts, Diana Walsh interrupted, stepping closer to the podium. We want answers about your teaching methods. Sarah maintained her position, though she noticed Diana was now standing uncomfortably close, a classic intimidation tactic. Mrs. Walsh, the data I'm presenting directly relates to teaching methods and their effectiveness. If you'll allow me to continue. Allow you? Rebecca Foster had moved to flank Sarah's other side. You work for us, Miss Mitchell. The taxpayers of this district pay your salary. We don't need your permission to ask questions. Brad Mitchell joined the other 2, completing what was now clearly a coordinated positioning strategy. Sarah found herself facing 3 hostile adults who had effectively surrounded her presentation area. The other parents in the room watched with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. You're absolutely right that you can ask questions, Sarah replied, not backing down from her position despite being outnumbered. But I'm asking for the courtesy of presenting the information I've prepared before we move to the question and answer portion. Courtesy? Diana's laugh was sharp and mocking. You want to talk about courtesy? How about the courtesy of consulting parents before making major changes to our children's education? Sarah felt her patience wearing thin. She dealt with difficult parents during her student teaching, but never 3 working in such obvious coordination. Their behavior was becoming increasingly inappropriate, and she could see other parents growing uncomfortable with the hostile atmosphere. Mrs. Walsh, what specific changes are you referring to? I've maintained Mrs. Henderson's classroom schedule, her reading groups, and her basic curriculum structure. The homework assignments, Brad Mitchell interjected. Kevin comes home frustrated every night because he can't understand what you're asking for. Sarah knew this wasn't true. Kevin's homework had been age-appropriate and clearly explained. She'd even sent additional instructions home after the first assignment when she noticed some students needed extra clarification. Mr. Mitchell, I've reviewed Kevin's homework with him personally on several occasions. When he asks for help, I provide it. The assignments are designed to reinforce concepts we've covered in class. That's the problem, Rebecca Foster said, her voice rising. Mrs. Henderson never gave homework that students couldn't complete independently. You're putting pressure on families to become tutors. Sarah's professional training told her to remain calm, but her karate background was teaching her something else entirely. These three parents weren't interested in productive dialogue. They were working together to break down her confidence and establish dominance over the classroom environment. I understand homework can be challenging, Sarah said, her voice taking on a steelier quality. But academic growth requires students to practice skills outside the classroom. The assignments I give are within normal parameters for the 4th grade. Curriculum. Normal parameters according to who? Diana demanded, stepping even closer. You? Someone who's been teaching for exactly 6 weeks. Sarah noticed that Diana was now close enough that her breath was uncomfortably warm on Sarah's face. This was beyond inappropriate professional behavior. It was aggressive intimidation. Other parents in the room were beginning to murmur among themselves, some clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. According to state educational standards, district curriculum guidelines, and research-based teaching practices, Sarah replied firmly, not backing away despite the uncomfortable proximity. Research-based, Rebecca sneered. More college textbook theory. Real teaching happens in the classroom, not in some university library. Sarah felt something shift inside her. Her years of martial arts training had taught her to recognize the difference between genuine conflict and manufactured aggression. These parents weren't concerned about education. They were conducting a power play designed to humiliate her in front of the community. Mrs. Foster, I've been in the classroom every day for 6 weeks. I've worked individually with your daughter. Claire helped her advance her reading level and supported her through a difficult math concept. If you'd like to discuss her specific progress, don't tell me about my daughter's progress, Rebecca snapped. I know my child better than you ever will. The room had grown uncomfortably quiet. Other parents were now clearly witnessing what amounted to coordinated harassment of their children's teacher. Sarah could see Maria Rodriguez looking concerned, James Thompson frowning at the aggressive behavior, and several other parents exchanging worried glances. Of course you know your daughter better than I do, Sarah agreed. But I know her as a student, and I can tell you that she's thriving academically. In fact, she's struggling, Rebecca cut her off. She comes home confused and frustrated. She never had these problems with Mrs. Henderson. Sarah knew this was completely false. Claire Foster was one of her most advanced students, often finishing assignments early and asking for additional challenges. She was confident, engaged, and showing remarkable academic growth. Mrs. Foster, Claire earned A's on her last 3 assignments and requested extra reading materials because she finished the class novel ahead of schedule. I'm not sure what confusion you're referring to. Are you calling me a liar? Rebecca's voice had risen to near shouting level. The confrontation had reached a dangerous tipping point. Sarah realized these parents had crossed the line from concerned questioning into outright aggression. Her training, both educational and martial arts, told her that de-escalation was no longer possible. I'm not calling anyone a liar, Sarah said, her voice carrying new authority. But I am questioning the accuracy of your information. Deanna Walsh's face flushed red. The accuracy of our information? We're the parents. We live with these children. We see the effects of your inexperienced teaching every single day. Then, perhaps, Sarah said quietly, you should look more carefully at what you're actually seeing. The comment hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah hadn't intended it as such, but her martial arts background had taught her never to back down from false accusations or manufactured conflict. Brad Mitchell took a step forward, his face contorted with anger. Are you suggesting we don't know our own children? Sarah stood her ground. She'd faced opponents in tournament competition who were bigger, stronger, and more aggressive than these three parents. She wasn't intimidated. I'm suggesting that if your children are having problems, we should work together to solve them rather than creating additional problems through confrontation. Confrontation? Diana Walsh's voice reached a new pitch. You think holding teachers accountable is confrontation? Maybe that's your problem. You can't handle legitimate criticism. Sarah felt her carefully maintained professional facade beginning to crack. These parents had moved beyond inappropriate behavior into something approaching harassment. She could see other parents in the room looking increasingly uncomfortable, some whispering among themselves about the hostile atmosphere. Mrs. Walsh, I welcome legitimate criticism and productive feedback. What I don't welcome is personal attacks disguised as educational concern. The words came out with more force than Sarah had intended. Her karate training emphasized control of mind, body, and situation. But control didn't mean submission to inappropriate aggression. Personal attacks? Rebecca Foster laughed harshly. Asking about your qualifications is a personal attack. Questioning your methods is inappropriate. Maybe you're too thin-skinned for teaching. Something dangerous flickered in Sarah's eyes. Years of martial arts competition had taught her to recognize when opponents were trying to provoke emotional reactions to gain tactical advantage. These three parents were using classic intimidation techniques: surrounding, crowding, verbal aggression, and public humiliation. My skin is exactly as thick as it needs to be, Sarah replied, her voice carrying an undertone that made several parents in the room sit up straighter. Diana Walsh either didn't recognize the warning in Sarah's tone or chose to ignore it. She stepped even closer, now violating normal personal space entirely. Prove it, Diana said, her voice low but audible throughout the room. Prove you can handle real pressure. Because if you can't deal with concerned parents asking legitimate questions, how are you going to handle our children when they challenge you? Sarah looked directly into Diana's eyes. The woman was close enough now that Sarah could smell her perfume and see the calculation behind her aggressive behavior. This wasn't about Tyler's education or homework assignments. This was about establishing dominance and control. Mrs. Walsh, Sarah said quietly, you might want to step back, or what? Diana challenged, not moving an inch. Sarah's training kicked in automatically. She'd spent years learning to assess threats, control situations, and respond proportionally to aggression. Diana Walsh was now clearly in her personal space, using physical intimidation as part of a coordinated attack on her professional authority. Or we'll need to discuss appropriate boundaries, Sarah replied, her voice carrying a quality that made Diana's eyes narrow with uncertainty. Rebecca Foster and Brad Mitchell exchanged glances, recognizing that the confrontation had reached a new level. Other parents in the room were now openly staring, some pulling out phones, others whispering urgent conversations about what they were witnessing. The three aggressive parents had succeeded in escalating the situation beyond normal bounds. What they didn't realize was that they'd just challenged someone whose training had prepared her for exactly this type of confrontation. Sarah stood perfectly still, her breathing controlled, her stance balanced. She'd given them multiple opportunities to return to appropriate behavior. They'd chosen escalation instead. The next few minutes would determine whether she remained a victim of their intimidation tactics or reminded them that respect was a two-way street. The real confrontation was about to begin. The tension in the multipurpose room had reached a suffocating level. Sarah could feel the eyes of 40 parents watching the standoff between her and the three aggressive adults who had effectively trapped her at the front of the room. Diana Walsh remained uncomfortably close, her breathing slightly elevated from the confrontation, while Rebecca Foster and Brad Mitchell flanked her sides like predators circling prey. Maria Rodriguez shifted nervously in her seat. her hands clutching her purse. She'd come to learn about her daughter Emma's progress, not to witness what appeared to be an orchestrated attack on their teacher. Several other parents had similar expressions of discomfort, but none seemed willing to intervene in what had become an increasingly volatile situation. "I'm waiting," Diana said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "You told me to step back. I'm still here. What exactly are you going to do about it?" Sarah's martial arts training had taught her to recognize the moment when de-escalation was no longer possible. Diana Walsh had just crossed that line. By refusing to respect personal boundaries and issuing a direct challenge, she'd escalated from inappropriate behavior to potential physical confrontation. "Mrs. Walsh," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a calm, measured tone that anyone with combat training would recognize as dangerous, "I'm going to ask you one more time to return to your seat so we can continue this meeting in a professional manner." "And I'm going to ask you one more time," Diana replied, leaning forward slightly, "to prove you're qualified to teach our children instead of hiding behind your fancy college degree." Rebecca Foster stepped closer, emboldened by Diana's aggression. "She can't prove it because she's not qualified. Look at her. She's intimidated by 3 concerned parents. How is she going to control 30 students?" Brad Mitchell nodded in agreement. "My son was right when he said she doesn't have any real authority in the classroom. Kids can sense weakness." Sarah felt something cold and focused settle over her. Mind. It was the same mental state she'd learned to access during tournament competition, a place where emotion was controlled, awareness was heightened, and reaction time was optimized. Her sensei had called it mushin, the mind without. Mind where training took over and conscious thought stepped aside. "You want to know about authority?" Sarah asked quietly. The question seemed simple enough, but something in her tone made Diana Walsh's eyes narrow with the first hint of uncertainty she'd shown all evening. Rebecca Foster glanced nervously at Brad Mitchell, perhaps recognizing that the dynamic in the room had shifted in some subtle but significant way. "Yes," Diana said, though her voice carried less conviction than before. "We want to know how someone with no real experience plans to maintain order and discipline." Sarah nodded slowly. "Authority isn't about intimidation, Mrs. Walsh. It's about confidence, preparation, and the ability to handle unexpected situations." She took a small step forward, not enough to be aggressive, but sufficient to reclaim some of her personal space. Diana found herself face to face with someone whose entire demeanor had changed in the space of a few seconds. "Authority," Sarah continued, "is about remaining calm under pressure, making quick decisions, and protecting those in your care." Her voice had taken on a quality that made several parents in the room lean forward unconsciously. There was something different about their mild-mannered teacher, something that suggested depths they hadn't previously imagined. Most importantly, Sarah said, her eyes never leaving Diana's face, authority is about understanding when situations have become inappropriate and knowing how to address them effectively. Diana Walsh was smart enough to recognize that the conversation had taken an unexpected turn, but too committed to her aggressive strategy to back down gracefully. "More education theory," she said, though her voice lacked its previous venom. "We're talking about real-world applications, are we?" Sarah asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like 3 adults have decided to gang up on one young woman in an attempt to humiliate her in front of her community. Is that the kind of real-world behavior you want your children to learn?" The question hit the room like a thunderclap. Several parents shifted uncomfortably, suddenly seeing the confrontation from a different perspective. Maria Rodriguez nodded slightly, her expression showing approval for Sarah's observation. James Thompson frowned at the 3 aggressive parents, clearly disapproving of their tactics. Rebecca Foster's face flushed red. "How dare you suggest we're trying to humiliate you? We're asking legitimate questions about. You stopped asking legitimate questions 20 minutes ago," Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying new steel. This stopped being about education the moment you decided to surround me, invade my personal space, and issue challenges. She turned slightly to address the broader room while keeping Diana Walsh in her peripheral vision. I came here tonight to share your children's progress, discuss curriculum goals, and answer genuine concerns about their education. I'm still willing to do that with anyone interested in productive dialogue. Brad Mitchell, perhaps sensing that public opinion was shifting against them, tried to regain the moral high ground. You can't turn this around on us. We're not the ones who need to prove ourselves. You are. Sarah turned back to face the three parents directly. Actually, Mr. Mitchell, I've already proven myself. Your children's test scores, their engagement in class, their academic growth, that's my proof. What you're doing right now is attempting to create a hostile work environment. The phrase hostile work environment seemed to penetrate the consciousness of several parents who worked in corporate settings. They began to murmur among themselves, recognizing that the three aggressive parents might have crossed legal as well as social boundaries. Diana Walsh realized she was losing control of the narrative. In desperation, she decided to escalate physically. She reached out and grabbed Sarah's blazer lapel, pulling her forward. Don't you dare lecture us about hostile environments, you little. Sarah's reaction was instantaneous and precise. Years of training in Kyokushin karate had conditioned her nervous system to respond automatically to physical aggression. Her left hand came up in a classic deflection technique, redirecting Diana's grip while simultaneously creating distance. Her right hand moved to a defensive position, and her stance shifted to provide optimal balance and mobility. The movement was so smooth and controlled that several parents didn't immediately realize what had happened. Diana Walsh found herself holding empty air, suddenly off balance and stumbling slightly backward. Mrs. Walsh, Sarah said, her voice now carrying unmistakable authority, you just made a serious mistake. The room erupted in gasps and exclamations. Parents began standing up, some moving toward the exits, others pulling out phones to record what was clearly becoming a physical confrontation. The careful social fabric of the parent meeting had been completely shredded. Rebecca Foster and Brad Mitchell stared in shock at their leader, who was now several feet away from Sarah and looking decidedly less confident about her aggressive strategy. Diana Walsh's face had gone pale as she realized she'd just physically assaulted a teacher in front of 40 witnesses. You pushed me, Diana stammered, though everyone in the room had seen that Sarah had simply defended herself. I defended myself, Sarah corrected calmly. When you grabbed my clothing, you committed assault. What I did was remove myself from your grasp using minimal force. James Thompson stood up from his seat in the back of the room. I saw the whole thing. That woman grabbed the teacher first. Maria Rodriguez nodded vigorously. She was way out of line. All three of them have been bullying Ms. Mitchell since the meeting started. Other parents began voicing their agreement, creating a wave of support that Diana Walsh clearly hadn't expected. Her carefully orchestrated campaign to humiliate Sarah was backfiring spectacularly, but Diana Walsh was too committed to her course of action to retreat gracefully. Humiliated and angry, she decided to escalate further. She lunged forward again, this time trying to grab Sarah's blouse. I'll show you what real consequences look like, she snarled. Sarah's second response was more decisive than her first. As Diana's hands reached for her clothing, Sarah executed a perfect irimi movement, a circular stepping motion that took her off the line of attack while positioning her at Diana's flank. Simultaneously, she performed a classic karate parry that redirected Diana's momentum while maintaining complete control of the situation. Diana Walsh found herself spinning past Sarah's position, her own momentum carrying her several steps beyond her target. She stumbled, her high heels betraying her on the smooth linoleum floor, and crashed into the first row of plastic chairs. The sound of Diana hitting the chairs echoed through the room like a gunshot. Parents scattered, some shouting in alarm, others rushing toward the confrontation to help or intervene. Rebecca Foster screamed Diana's name, while Brad Mitchell stood frozen in shock at how quickly their coordinated attack had fallen apart. Sarah remained in a perfect, defensive stance, balanced and ready, her eyes tracking all three aggressive parents, while maintaining awareness of the chaos erupting around her. Her breathing was controlled, her movements precise, and her expression calm despite the mayhem she was surrounded by. "Anyone else want to discuss my qualifications?" she asked quietly. The question carried across the room despite the noise and confusion. Several parents who'd been moving toward the exits stopped and turned back to stare at their teacher. Seeing her with completely new eyes, Diana Walsh lay tangled in the overturned chairs, her carefully styled hair disheveled and her face flushed with embarrassment and rage. Her attempted assault had been turned against her so efficiently that she appeared to have thrown herself into the furniture. But the confrontation wasn't over. Diana's humiliation was complete, but her anger had reached a dangerous level. As she struggled to untangle herself from the plastic chairs, her face twisted with fury. The breaking point had arrived, and everyone in the room was about to discover exactly what their mild-mannered fourth-grade teacher was capable of when pushed beyond reasonable limits. The real shock was still to come. Diana Walsh clawed her way out of the tangle of overturned chairs, her designer outfit now wrinkled and her composure completely shattered. The multipurpose room had descended into chaos, with parents shouting, children crying from the hallway where they'd been waiting in the adjacent classroom, and the sound of hurried footsteps as school security rushed toward the commotion. "You think you're so smart?" Diana screamed, her voice cracking with humiliation and rage. "You think your little college tricks make you better than us?" Sarah maintained her defensive position, her trained eyes tracking not just Diana but also Rebecca Foster and Brad Mitchell, who appeared to be regrouping for another coordinated attack. The room's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the scene, making everything feel surreal and dangerous. "This ends now," Sarah said firmly, her voice cutting through the chaos with startling authority. "All three of you need to leave immediately." But Diana Walsh was beyond reason. Her public humiliation had triggered something primal and destructive. She spotted Sarah's laptop on the podium, the carefully prepared presentation that had been forgotten in the escalating confrontation, and her eyes lit up with malicious intent. "You want to show us your fancy slideshow?" Diana snarled, lunging toward the podium. "Let me show you what I think of your teaching methods." She grabbed the laptop with both hands, clearly intending to smash it to the floor. The device contained not just Sarah's presentation, but weeks of lesson plans, student assessments, and detailed notes about each child's progress and learning needs. Sarah's reaction was swift and decisive. In one fluid motion, she executed a perfect Mageri, a front kick that martial artists spend years perfecting. Her right leg snapped forward with precision and control, her foot connecting squarely with Diana's solar plexus. Just as the woman lifted the laptop above her head, the kick wasn't intended to seriously injure, but it was delivered with enough force to immediately incapacitate Diana's ability to cause further damage. The laptop flew from Diana's hands as she doubled over, gasping for breath and staggering backward. The room fell into stunned silence. 40 parents watched in absolute amazement as their mild-mannered fourth-grade teacher stood in a perfect karate stance, her legs still extended from the kick, her balance flawless, and her expression calm and controlled. The transformation from soft-spoken educator to formidable martial artist was so complete that many parents later said they felt like they were seeing two different people occupying the same body. "Holy shit," whispered Tom Anderson, father of twins in Sarah's class, his voice barely audible but carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. Sarah slowly lowered her leg and settled back into a ready position, her eyes scanning the room for any additional threats. Diana Walsh was bent over, hands on her knees, struggling to catch her breath, but clearly no longer capable of causing immediate trouble. Rebecca Foster and Brad Mitchell stood frozen, their mouths agape, suddenly realizing they'd been threatening someone far more capable than they'd imagined. The cocky aggression they'd displayed moments earlier had evaporated entirely, replaced by shock and the dawning awareness that they'd seriously misjudged their target. "Does anyone else want to damage school property?" Sarah asked quietly, her tone conversational despite having just demonstrated a level of physical capability that no one in the room had suspected. The laptop had landed safely on a nearby table, its screen still glowing with her presentation slides. Sarah moved to check it quickly, confirming it was undamaged, before returning her attention to the three parents who had orchestrated the evening's chaos. Principal Davidson burst through the doors at that moment, followed by 2 security guards and the school's resource officer. They'd clearly been summoned by parents who'd called the office during the confrontation, but they stopped short upon entering the room. The scene that greeted them was unlike anything they'd expected. Parents were clustered along the walls, many still holding phones that had been recording the confrontation. Plastic chairs were scattered across the front of the room. Diana Walsh was gasping for breath in the center of the chaos. And Sarah Mitchell stood in what was unmistakably a martial arts stance, completely composed despite the mayhem surrounding her. "What in the world is going on here?" Principal Davidson demanded, his eyes taking in the overturned furniture and the obvious signs of physical altercation. Maria Rodriguez stepped forward immediately. "Principal Davidson, 3 parents have been attacking Ms. Mitchell all evening. They surrounded her, grabbed her clothes, and tried to destroy her computer. She was defending herself." James Thompson nodded vigorously from the back of the room. "I recorded most of it on my phone." Those 3 were completely out of line. Miss Mitchell showed incredible restraint. Other parents began speaking up simultaneously, creating a chorus of support for Sarah that clearly surprised Principal Davidson. He'd expected to find his young teacher in trouble, not to discover she'd been the victim of coordinated harassment. "She assaulted me," Diana Walsh gasped, finally recovering enough breath to speak. "She attacked me without provocation." "That's a lie," called out Jennifer Hayes, whose son Marcus had struggled with reading until Sarah's innovative teaching methods helped him improve dramatically. "You grabbed her first. Twice, we all saw it." Principal Davidson's expression grew increasingly stern as he processed the information. A parent attacking a teacher during an official school meeting was a serious matter with potential legal ramifications. The fact that multiple witnesses were contradicting Diana Walsh's version of events suggested the situation was more clear-cut than he'd initially feared. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm going to need you to come to my office immediately," he said firmly. "Mr. Mitchell, Mrs. Foster, you too. Officer Martinez, please escort them." But Diana Walsh wasn't finished. Humiliated, winded, and facing potential consequences for her actions, she decided to make one final attempt at salvaging her position. As Officer Martinez approached her, she suddenly straightened up and pointed an accusing finger at Sarah. "She's been hiding things from us," Diana shouted desperately. "Look at her. She's been pretending to be some innocent young teacher, while she's really some kind of trained fighter. She's been lying to our children." The accusation hung in the air for a moment before Sarah stepped forward. Her stance was no longer defensive. She moved with the confident grace of someone completely in control of both the situation and herself. "Mrs. Walsh," Sarah said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room, "I've never lied to anyone about anything. My background includes 4 years of Kyokushin karate training and a black belt earned through regional competition. I also have a master's degree in elementary education with honors, 2 years of volunteer teaching experience, and 6 weeks of successful classroom management with your children." She paused, looking around the room at the assembled parents who were listening with rapt attention. "What I haven't done," Sarah continued, "is use my martial arts training to intimidate students, threaten parents, or solve classroom problems with physical force. What I did tonight was defend myself and school property when 3 adults chose to escalate a professional meeting into a physical confrontation." Principal Davidson looked impressed despite the chaos surrounding them. "Ms. Mitchell, are you saying you have martial arts training?" "Yes, sir. I earned my black belt before starting college. I've maintained my training throughout my education because the discipline and mental focus have made me a better teacher." Rebecca Foster found her voice, though it came out as more of a squeak than her earlier aggressive tone. "You never mentioned that in your introduction letter." Sarah turned to face her calmly. "Mrs. Foster, did you mention your hobbies, athletic background, or personal interests in your last job application?" "My martial arts training is personal development that happens to complement my professional skills. It's not relevant to teaching the 4th grade curriculum." Several parents nodded in understanding. Tom Anderson spoke up again. "Actually, it kind of is relevant. Kids respect teachers who have interesting backgrounds and diverse skills." Other parents began agreeing, creating a wave of support that further isolated the 3 aggressive adults who had caused the evening's problems. Diana Walsh realized her final gambit had failed spectacularly. Instead of turning the parents against Sarah by revealing her deception, she'd actually made their teacher more interesting and impressive in their eyes. Parents were now looking at Sarah with a mixture of respect, admiration, and curiosity. "I want her fired," Deanna said weakly, her voice lacking any conviction. "On what grounds?" Principal Davidson asked pointedly. "For defending herself against assault, for protecting school property, for maintaining professional composure while being verbally attacked by 3 adults who should have known better." The room remained silent as the full implications of the evening's events settled over. Everyone present. 3 parents had coordinated an attack on a young teacher, escalated to physical violence, and been systematically outmaneuvered by someone who had demonstrated both professional competence and personal capability far beyond their expectations. Sarah straightened her blazer and smoothed her hair, transforming back into the composed educator she'd been at the beginning of the evening. But everyone in the room now understood that beneath her professional exterior was someone with the training, discipline, and confidence to handle far more challenging situations than an elementary school classroom could ever present. "Principal Davidson," Sarah said respectfully, "if it's possible, I'd still like to complete my presentation for the parents who came here to learn about their children's progress." The request was so reasonable, so focused on her professional responsibilities, despite everything that had just occurred, that several parents actually applauded spontaneously. The real revelation wasn't just Sarah's martial arts skills, it was the discovery that their children's teacher possessed exactly the kind of strength, composure, and dedication they wanted in someone responsible for their most precious possessions. But the evening's surprises weren't quite finished yet. Officer Martinez escorted Diana Walsh, Rebecca Foster, and Brad Mitchell toward the exit, their earlier bravado replaced by sullen silence and the dawning realization of potential legal consequences. Diana walked with a slight limp, still feeling the effects of Sarah's precisely delivered kick, while Rebecca and Brad avoided eye contact with the other parents who watched their departure with a mixture of disapproval and relief. As the door closed behind the troublemakers, the atmosphere in the multipurpose room underwent a dramatic transformation. The tension that had dominated the evening evaporated, replaced by an almost electric energy of curiosity and newfound respect. Parents who had been cowering along the walls began moving back to their seats, straightening overturned chairs, and creating a proper meeting environment once again. Principal Davidson remained in the room, his expression shifting from stern authority to genuine admiration as he watched Sarah calmly reorganize her materials. Ms. Mitchell, he said, approaching the podium, I owe you an apology. I should have intervened earlier when reports of their behavior reached my office. Sarah looked up from her laptop, her professional demeanor fully restored. Principal Davidson, I appreciate that, but honestly, I think it needed to play out this way. Those 3 parents weren't going to accept my authority through words alone. Sometimes people need to understand that respect works both ways. Tom Anderson raised his hand from the middle of the room. Ms. Mitchell, I have to ask, have you ever had to use your martial arts training in the classroom? A ripple of laughter went through the room as parents imagined their mild-mannered teacher dealing with unruly students using karate techniques. Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile she'd shown all evening. Mr. Anderson, I can honestly say that 4th graders present very different challenges than aggressive adults. The discipline and mental focus I learned through karate training helped me stay calm during classroom disruptions, but I've never needed to physically restrain a student. Usually, a firm voice and consistent expectations are quite effective. Maria. Rodriguez stood up, her earlier nervousness replaced by obvious admiration. Ms. Mitchell, I want to apologize for not speaking up sooner when those 3 were attacking you. Emma comes home every day excited about school for the first time in years. You've made such a positive difference in her life. Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez. Emma is a joy to teach, and her enthusiasm for learning makes my job easier. Jennifer Hayes raised her hand next. Can you tell us more about your martial arts background? I mean, that was incredible what you did tonight. Sarah considered the question carefully. The evening's events had inadvertently revealed a part of her life she'd kept private, but perhaps transparency would help build stronger relationships with the parent community. I started training in Kyokushin karate when I was 16, she began, settling into a more comfortable teaching posture. My younger brother was being bullied at school, and I wanted to learn how to protect him if necessary. What I discovered was that martial arts training teaches so much more than self-defense. She moved from behind the podium, making the conversation more personal and engaging. Kyokushin emphasizes discipline, respect, perseverance, and mental toughness. Those qualities have made me a better teacher because they help me stay focused under pressure, maintain consistent standards, and approach challenges with confidence rather than anxiety. James Thompson nodded thoughtfully. That explains a lot about your classroom management style. My son Marcus mentioned that you never seem flustered, even when kids are being difficult. Exactly, Sarah agreed. When you've spent years training to maintain composure while someone is trying to kick you in the head, managing a classroom full of energetic 9-year-olds feels quite manageable by comparison. The comment drew more laughter and helped further relax the atmosphere. Parents were beginning to see their teacher not as a potential threat or unknown quantity, but as someone with unique qualifications that actually enhanced her ability to educate and protect their children. Principal Davidson cleared his throat. Ms. Mitchell, if you're comfortable continuing, I think these parents would benefit from hearing about their children's actual progress. That's why they came here tonight, after all. Sarah nodded and returned to her laptop. Absolutely. Let me show you some of the exciting developments we've seen over the past 6 weeks. She clicked to her first presentation slide, which displayed a colorful chart showing reading comprehension improvements across the class. As you can see, every single student has shown measurable progress in reading comprehension. The class average has improved by 18% since the beginning of the year. Tom Anderson leaned forward. That's impressive. How did you achieve those results so quickly? I implemented a combination of individualized reading groups and peer tutoring partnerships, Sarah explained, advancing to the next slide. Students work with partners at similar reading levels to practice comprehension strategies, then rotate to work with students at different levels to reinforce their learning through teaching. She clicked a slide showing math achievement data. In mathematics, We've seen even more dramatic improvements. 28 out of 32 students have advanced at least one grade level in computational skills, and 15 students have shown significant improvement in problem-solving abilities. Maria Rodriguez raised her hand. Emma mentioned something. About math detectives. Can you explain that program? Sarah's enthusiasm for her teaching methods was evident as she smiled broadly. The Math Detective program turns word problems into mysteries that students solve in teams. They have to identify clues, eliminate red herrings, and work together to find solutions. It makes abstract mathematical concepts more concrete and engaging. She advanced to a slide showing student artwork and creative writing samples. But academic achievement is only part of our success story. Your children have also shown tremendous growth in creativity, collaboration, and critical thinking skills. Jennifer Hayes studied the displayed student work with obvious pride. These writing samples are much more sophisticated than what my older daughter was producing in 4th grade. That's because we've implemented a workshop approach to writing, Sarah explained. Students choose their own topics, work through multiple drafts with peer feedback, and publish their final pieces for authentic audiences. When children write about subjects they care about, their engagement and quality improve dramatically. She clicked to her final academic slide, which showed a comparison of her students' progress versus district averages. The results were striking. Her class was outperforming grade-level expectations in every measured category. These results speak for themselves, Principal Davidson said, clearly impressed. Ms. Mitchell, in my 23 years as an educator, I've rarely seen such comprehensive improvement in such a short time period. Robert Chun, whose daughter Amy was one of Sarah's quieter students, raised his hand. Ms. Mitchell, Amy has always been shy in school settings. How have you helped her build confidence? Sarah's expression softened with obvious affection for her students. Amy is incredibly thoughtful and insightful, but she needs time to process her ideas before sharing them. I've implemented several strategies to support students like Amy: written reflection time before discussions, partner sharing before whole group activities, and alternative ways to demonstrate understanding. She clicked a new slide showing photographs of classroom activities. For example, Amy excels at creating visual representations of her learning. While some students prefer verbal explanations, Amy's diagrams and illustrations often show deeper understanding than traditional written responses. The slide showed students working in various configurations, individual research, small group projects, and whole class discussions. Every child appeared engaged and comfortable in the learning environment. You can see that our classroom accommodates different learning styles and personality types, Sarah continued. Some students thrive in large group discussions, others prefer quiet, independent work, and many fall somewhere in between. The key is providing multiple pathways to success. Tom Anderson studied the photographs carefully. The kids all looked genuinely happy to be there. That wasn't always the case in my own school experience. When students feel safe, respected, and intellectually challenged, learning becomes joyful rather than stressful, Sarah explained. My martial arts training has actually helped with this. The same principles that create effective training environments apply to classroom management. She clicked a slide titled Discipline and Respect. In karate, students learn that discipline isn't about punishment. It's about self-control, focus, and commitment to improvement. Those same concepts work beautifully in academic settings. Maria Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. Emma has been talking about growth mindset and how mistakes help her learn better. Is that part of this approach? Exactly, Sarah confirmed. When students understand that intelligence and ability can be developed through effort and practice, they become more willing to take academic risks and persevere through challenges. It's the same mindset that allows martial artists to continue training even when techniques are difficult to master. The presentation had completely transformed the room's energy. Parents who had arrived skeptical and concerned were now engaged, impressed, and genuinely excited about their children's educational experience. The contrast with the evening's earlier hostility was stark and powerful. Principal Davidson looked around the room at the attentive, positive faces. I think it's safe to say that Ms. Mitchell has more than proven her qualifications and effectiveness as an educator. A spontaneous round of applause broke out, led by James Thompson, and quickly joined by every parent in the room. Sarah found herself genuinely moved by their response, especially after the traumatic confrontation that had begun the evening. But as the applause died down, she realized there was one more important topic to address, one that would determine whether the night's events would have lasting positive or negative consequences for her teaching career and the school community. The real test of leadership was still ahead. As the applause faded, Sarah took a deep breath and made a decision that would define her relationship with the Millbrook community for years to come. She stepped out from behind the podium and moved closer to the seated parents, her posture open and inviting rather than defensive. "Before we wrap up this evening," she said, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had impressed everyone during the confrontation, "I want to address what happened here tonight and what it means for our children moving forward." The room grew quiet, parents sensing that their teacher was about to say something important. Principal Davidson remained near the back, watching with professional interest as Sarah navigated what could be a delicate situation. "When I accepted this position 6 weeks ago," Sarah began, "I knew I'd face challenges. Taking over for a beloved veteran teacher is never easy, and I expected some skepticism about my methods and experience. What I didn't expect was to find myself in a physical altercation during my first parent meeting." She paused, looking around the room at faces that were now attentive and supportive rather than hostile. "But I want you to know that I don't regret how tonight unfolded. Sometimes difficult situations reveal important truths about people's character and capabilities." Tom Anderson nodded thoughtfully. "Ms. Mitchell, I have to say, watching you handle that situation with such control and professionalism was impressive. It tells me a lot about how you probably handle classroom challenges." "Thank you, Mr. Anderson. That's exactly the point I want to make. The discipline and mental training I've developed through martial arts doesn't just help me defend myself against aggressive adults. It helps me remain calm when Kevin Mitchell is having a meltdown about math homework, or when Tyler Walsh is testing boundaries during reading time." Maria Rodriguez raised her hand. "Can you give us some specific examples of how your training helps in the classroom?" Sarah moved to lean against her desk, making the conversation more informal and personal. "Last week, Marcus Thompson was having a particularly difficult day. His grandfather had been hospitalized, and Marcus was acting out, throwing pencils, disrupting other students, refusing to participate in activities." James Thompson's expression grew concerned. "He didn't tell me he was causing problems at school, because there weren't any problems," Sarah said with a gentle smile. "My training taught me to recognize when behavior is motivated by pain rather than defiance. Instead of sending Marcus to the principal's office, I invited him to help me organize the classroom library. We spent 15 minutes talking about his grandfather while he sorted books, and by the time we finished, he was ready to rejoin the class activities." She looked directly at James Thompson. "Marcus didn't need punishment. He needed someone to acknowledge his emotional state and give him a constructive way to process his feelings. The same awareness and patience that helps martial artists understand their opponents helps teachers understand their students." Jennifer Hayes leaned forward with interest. "That's fascinating. How else does your training influence your teaching?" "The concept of zanshin, continued awareness, is crucial in both contexts," Sarah explained. "In karate, you never assume a technique has worked or that your opponent is defeated until the situation is completely resolved. In teaching, You never assume students understand a concept just because they nod or say yes. You maintain awareness of their actual comprehension and adjust accordingly. She moved to her laptop and pulled up a new slide showing a photograph of her classroom during a typical lesson. Look at this picture and tell me what you notice about the students' body language and engagement levels. The parents studied the image carefully. Robert Chun spoke first. Every child appears to be actively participating. Even the ones who aren't speaking are leaning forward and making eye contact. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. That level of engagement doesn't happen by accident. It requires constant awareness of each individual student's energy level, comprehension, and emotional state. My martial arts training taught me to process multiple streams of information simultaneously, while maintaining focus on primary objectives. Principal Davidson stepped forward, clearly impressed by the educational discussion that had emerged from the evening's chaos. Ms. Mitchell, would you be willing to present some of these techniques to our other teachers? I think the entire faculty could benefit from understanding how mindfulness and awareness training enhance classroom management. I'd be honored to share these concepts with my colleagues, Sarah replied. In fact, I've been developing a workshop called The Mindful Educator that combines martial arts principles with research-based teaching strategies. Tom Anderson raised his hand again. Ms. Mitchell, I work in corporate training, and what you're describing sounds similar to some high-level leadership development programs. Have you considered the broader applications of your approach? Sarah's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. Actually, yes. My master's thesis explored the intersection of martial arts philosophy and educational psychology. I discovered that many principles that create effective warriors also create effective teachers. Discipline, situational awareness, controlled response to pressure, and the ability to remain calm while making split-second decisions. She clicked on a new slide showing a comparison chart between martial arts training elements and classroom management skills. For example, the concept of MAI, proper distance and timing, applies directly to knowing when to intervene in student conflicts and when to allow children to work through challenges independently. Maria Rodriguez nodded with understanding. Emma mentioned that you always seem to know exactly when she needs help and when she needs to figure things out herself. She said you have teacher superpowers. The comment drew laughter from the room and a genuine smile from Sarah. Emma is very perceptive. What she's noticing is the result of training myself to read subtle behavioral cues and respond appropriately. It's not supernatural, it's just highly developed observational skills. Robert Chun looked thoughtful. Ms. Mitchell, given what we witnessed tonight, I have to ask, are you concerned about potential retaliation from the 3 parents who were removed? Small communities can be challenging when conflicts become public. Sarah's expression grew more serious. Mr. Chun, that's a valid concern, and I appreciate you raising it. Deanna Walsh, Rebecca Foster, and Brad Mitchell are facing potential assault charges based on multiple witness accounts and Officer Martinez's report. Their children will remain in my classroom unless they choose to transfer schools, and I'm committed to ensuring that any adult conflicts don't impact the kids' educational experience. She paused, choosing her words carefully. However, I also want to be clear about boundaries and expectations moving forward. Tonight demonstrated that some adults need to understand that teachers deserve the same respect we show to parents and community members. Professional disagreements should never escalate to personal attacks or physical confrontation. Principal Davidson nodded approvingly. The district will be conducting a full investigation of tonight's events. We take parent misconduct as seriously as we take any other form of harassment in our school environment. Jennifer Hayes raised her hand. What can we as parents do to support you and ensure this kind of situation doesn't happen again? Sarah considered the question thoughtfully. The most important thing you can do is maintain open communication with me about your children's needs and concerns. If you have questions about my teaching methods or your child's progress, please contact me directly rather than allowing misunderstandings to fester. She moved back to the center of the room, addressing the entire group. I also want to encourage you to model the kind of respectful disagreement and problem-solving that we're teaching your children. Tonight, several of you demonstrated exactly that. You spoke up when you witnessed inappropriate behavior. You provided accurate accounts of what happened, and you're now engaging in constructive dialogue about education. Tom Anderson stood up. Ms. Mitchell, I think I speak for everyone here when I say that tonight has given us tremendous confidence in your ability to educate and protect our children. Your combination of professional knowledge, personal strength, and genuine care for students is exactly what we want in a teacher. The sentiment was echoed by murmurs of agreement throughout the room. Parents began sharing specific examples of positive changes they'd noticed in their children since Sarah had taken over the classroom. My daughter Claire has been asking to stay after school to work on extra projects, Rebecca Chun mentioned. She's never shown that level of academic enthusiasm before. Marcus has been teaching his little sister the growth mindset concepts he's learning in class, James Thompson added. He actually thanked me for letting him struggle with his homework instead of giving him answers immediately. Emma draws pictures of her classroom activities every evening, Maria Rodriguez shared. She's never been so excited about school. Sarah found herself genuinely moved by the parents' feedback. The evening had begun with her feeling isolated and under attack, but it was ending with strong community support and recognition of her efforts. Thank you all for sharing that feedback, she said. These stories remind me why I became a teacher in the first place. Every child deserves to feel excited about learning, confident in their abilities, and supported in their growth. She glanced at the clock on the wall. I know it's getting late, and this has been an emotionally intense evening for everyone. But before we adjourn, I want to extend an invitation that I hope will strengthen our partnership moving forward. The parents waited expectantly, curious about what their remarkable teacher would propose next. I'd like to invite any interested families to visit our classroom during regular school hours to observe the teaching methods we've discussed tonight. Seeing your children engaged in actual learning activities will give you a much better understanding of our classroom culture than any presentation could provide. The invitation was met with enthusiastic responses from multiple parents, creating a buzz of excitement about the opportunity to see their children's educational experience firsthand. But Sarah had one more surprise that would transform the relationship between school and community in ways none of them could have anticipated. 3 months after the notorious parent meeting that would become legendary in Millbrook Township, Sarah Mitchell arrived at Jefferson Elementary to find a small crowd gathered outside her classroom. But unlike the hostile atmosphere of that October evening, this group consisted of excited children, supportive parents, and curious educators from neighboring districts. Today marked the launch of Sarah's pilot program, Mindful Warriors, an after-school initiative that combined academic enrichment with basic martial arts principles and mindfulness training. The program had emerged from conversations with parents following the infamous confrontation, and its popularity had exceeded everyone's expectations. Ms. Mitchell, Ms. Mitchell. Emma Rodriguez ran up to her teacher, practically bouncing with excitement. My mom said today we get to learn real karate moves. Sarah smiled, adjusting the duffel bag containing training mats and her GI, the traditional martial arts uniform she'd brought for demonstration purposes. Emma, we're going to learn about focus and self-control first. The physical techniques come after you understand the mental discipline. Marcus Thompson approached more quietly, his natural shyness still evident despite the confidence he'd gained over the past months. Ms. Mitchell, will learning martial arts make me braver? Sometimes I still get scared when bigger kids pick on smaller ones." Sarah knelt down to Marcus's eye level, a gesture that had become characteristic of her teaching style. "Marcus, courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are scared. The training we'll do together will help you stay calm and think clearly in difficult situations." Principal Davidson emerged from the building, followed by Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the district office. No relation to Diana Walsh, who had quietly withdrawn Tyler from Jefferson Elementary after facing misdemeanor assault charges. Dr. Walsh was documenting the Mindful Warriors program for potential district-wide implementation. "Ms. Mitchell," Dr. Walsh said, extending her hand in greeting, "I've been reviewing the academic performance data from your classroom. The improvements your students have shown are remarkable. 28% increase in reading comprehension, 35% improvement in mathematical problem solving, and completely transformed classroom behavior metrics." Sarah shook her hand professionally. "Thank you, Dr. Walsh. I believe the improvements reflect what happens when children feel safe, respected, and intellectually challenged. The martial arts principles we're incorporating simply enhance those foundational elements." Tom Anderson approached with his twin daughters, both carrying small notebooks they'd been using to track their growth mindset goals, a concept Sarah had introduced that encouraged students to set personal challenges and celebrate incremental progress. "Ms. Mitchell," Tom said, "I wanted you to know that the leadership principles you've been teaching the kids have started influencing how our family handles conflicts at home. When the girls disagree about something, they've started using the respectful dialogue techniques you taught them." Sarah felt a familiar warmth at hearing how classroom lessons were extending into family life. "That's wonderful, Mr. Anderson. Real learning happens when children can apply concepts across different environments." As more families arrived for the program launch, Sarah noticed several unexpected faces in the crowd. Robert Chun was there, with his daughter Amy, but he'd also brought his elderly father, who walked with a cane and observed everything with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Ms. Mitchell," Robert said, "I'd like you to meet my father, Master Chun. He taught traditional Kung Fu in China before immigrating to America 30 years ago. When I told him about your program, he asked to observe." Master Chun stepped forward and offered a respectful bow, which Sarah returned with equal formality. "Master Chun, it's an honor to meet you. I hope you'll share your observations and insights as we develop this program." The elderly man's eyes twinkled with approval. "Young teacher," he said in accented but clear English, "my son tells me you use warrior wisdom to teach children about learning and respect. This is a very traditional approach. Very good." Sarah felt genuinely humbled by the acknowledgement from someone with authentic martial arts credentials. "Master Chun, I would welcome any guidance you're willing to offer. My goal is to help children develop inner strength and self-discipline, not just physical techniques." As the crowd moved into the gymnasium that had been set up for the program, Sarah caught sight of Maria Rodriguez talking with a woman she didn't recognize. Maria waved her over with obvious excitement. "Ms. Mitchell, I want you to meet Dr. Patricia Santos from the University Research Center. She heard about your program and wants to discuss a potential study on martial arts-based education methodologies." Dr. Santos extended her hand with academic enthusiasm. "Ms. Mitchell, your approach represents exactly the kind of innovative integration we've been hoping to research. The preliminary data from your classroom suggests that mindfulness and martial arts principles might significantly enhance traditional educational outcomes." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about the research implications. "Dr. Santos, I'd be very interested in participating in formal research. However, my primary focus has to remain on serving my current students and their families." "Of course," Dr. Santos agreed. "But imagine the potential impact if we could develop replicable methodologies that other teachers could implement. Your approach could influence education far beyond Millbrook Township. As parents and children settled into the gymnasium, Sarah noticed that news of the program had spread beyond the immediate school community. Several teachers from other schools were observing, and she recognized a reporter from the local newspaper setting up a camera in the back. Principal Davidson stepped to the front of the group. "Ladies and gentlemen, 3 months ago, many of U.S. witnessed an unfortunate confrontation that could have damaged our school community permanently. Instead, it became the catalyst for something extraordinary, a program that combines academic excellence with character development in ways we'd never imagined." He gestured toward Sarah, who stood before the group in her traditional white GI, her black belt tied with precision and dignity. "Ms. Mitchell, would you like to explain how tonight's program will work?" Sarah moved to the center of the mat she'd laid out, her presence commanding immediate attention from both children and adults. "Tonight, we're going to explore how the mind and body work together to create focus, confidence, and respect. We'll start with breathing exercises that help calm nervousness and improve concentration." She demonstrated a basic meditation posture, and within moments, 30 children were sitting cross-legged, eyes closed, following her breathing instructions. The transformation in the room's energy was immediate and profound. "The first principle of martial arts," Sarah said in a calm, clear voice, "is respect. We respect our teachers, our training partners, our opponents, and ourselves. This respect creates a safe environment where everyone can learn and grow." Emma Rodriguez raised her hand. "Ms. Mitchell, is that why you stayed so calm when those mean parents were yelling at you?" The question drew chuckles from the adult observers, but Sarah answered seriously. "Emma, that's exactly right. When people are angry or afraid, they often try to make others feel the same way. But when you're trained to stay calm and focused, you can respond thoughtfully instead of just reacting emotionally." Master Chun nodded approvingly from his seat along the wall. "Very good explanation. Emotional control is the foundation of all martial arts." Sarah began teaching the children a basic kata, a series of movements that looked like a slow, deliberate dance but actually represented defensive and offensive techniques. As the children moved in unison, copying her precise motions, the adults watched in fascination. "Notice how the children's attention has improved," Sarah said to the observing parents while continuing to guide the kata. "When mind and body are working together toward a common goal, concentration becomes natural rather than forced." Dr. Santos was taking rapid notes, clearly impressed by the engagement level she was witnessing. Tom Anderson was recording with his phone, while several other parents exchanged amazed glances at how focused their typically energetic children had become. After the kata, Sarah transitioned to partner exercises that required children to work together while maintaining respect and control. Marcus Thompson, who had struggled with confidence issues, was now helping younger students learn proper stances, his earlier shyness replaced by gentle leadership. These exercises teach children that real strength comes from self-control and helping others, not from dominating or intimidating, Sarah explained to the adults. They learn to use their developing skills responsibly. As the session continued, it became clear that something special was happening. Children who rarely interacted were working together harmoniously. Students who usually struggled with attention were maintaining focus for extended periods. The combination of physical movement, mental discipline, and respect-based interaction was creating exactly the kind of learning environment Sarah had envisioned. Near the end of the session, Tyler Walsh appeared in the gymnasium doorway with his father, Brad Mitchell. They'd been quiet since Diana Walsh's legal troubles and their family's withdrawal from the school, but Tyler had asked repeatedly to return to Miss Mitchell's class. Sarah noticed them immediately but continued leading the final meditation without breaking rhythm. When the session ended and children began talking excitedly with their parents, She approached Brad and Tyler carefully. "Tyler," she said warmly, "it's good to see you. How are you doing at your new school?" Tyler looked down at his feet. "One miss. Your class, Ms. Mitchell. My new teacher doesn't make learning fun like you do." Brad Mitchell cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Miss Mitchell, I owe you an apology. My behavior that night was inexcusable, and I've spent 3 months regretting how I handled my concerns about Tyler's education." Sarah extended her hand to him with genuine warmth. "Mr. Mitchell, we all make mistakes when we're worried about our children. What matters is learning from those experiences and moving forward positively." Tyler looked up hopefully. "Ms. Mitchell, could I maybe come back to Jefferson Elementary? I promise I'll work really hard and follow all the rules." Sarah looked at Principal Davidson, who had approached the conversation with interest. "That decision isn't mine to make alone, Tyler, but I want you to know that you would be welcomed back if the administrative details can be worked out." Principal Davidson nodded. "Mr. Mitchell, let's schedule a meeting this week to discuss Tyler's situation. I think we can find a positive solution." As families began leaving the gymnasium, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. What had started as a traumatic confrontation had evolved into innovative programming that was attracting attention from educators and researchers across the region. Dr. Santos approached her as she packed up the training mats. "Miss Mitchell, I'd like to propose a formal partnership between your program and our research center. With proper documentation and study, your methods could influence education policy at the state level." Master Chun moved slowly toward them, supported by his cane but radiating dignity and wisdom. "Young teacher," he said to Sarah, "tonight I see something very rare. Warrior spirit used to serve others. You bring honor to martial arts tradition." Maria Rodriguez was the last parent to leave, waiting with Emma, who was still buzzing with excitement from the evening. "Miss Mitchell," Maria said, 6 months ago, I was worried about Emma's education because of the disruption caused by Mrs. Henderson's illness. Tonight, I'm convinced that everything happened exactly as it was meant to. Emma has grown more in the past 3 months than in the previous 2 years combined." Emma hugged Sarah tightly. "Ms. Mitchell, can we do this every week? Learning is so much more fun when it includes martial arts." Sarah returned the hug, feeling the deep satisfaction that came from seeing children excited about their own growth and development. "Emma, will continue the program as long as children and families want to participate. Learning should always be an adventure." As the last families departed and Sarah finished cleaning up the gymnasium, she thought about the unexpected path that had led her to this moment. A single evening of confrontation had revealed not just her capacity for self-defense, but her ability to transform challenges into opportunities for growth and community building. The reporter from the local newspaper approached as she headed toward the exit. "Miss Mitchell, could I ask you a quick question? How do you think tonight's program might influence other schools in the district?" Sarah considered the question thoughtfully. "I hope other educators will see that teaching is most effective when it engages the whole child, mind, body, and character. The specific methods matter less than the commitment to helping children develop confidence, respect, and a love of learning." She paused at the gymnasium door, looking back at the space where so much learning and growth had occurred. "Most importantly, I hope tonight demonstrates that when communities come together to support children's education, remarkable things become possible." 3 months later, the Mindful Warriors program had expanded to 5 schools in the district. Sarah had been invited to present her methods at regional education conferences. Master Chun had become a volunteer instructor, sharing traditional wisdom with a new generation of young learners. But the real measure of success wasn't in awards or recognition. It was in the confident voices of children who had learned that true strength came from within, the grateful appreciation of parents who had watched their children flourish, and the knowledge that a single moment of standing up for what was right had created Ripples of positive change that would influence lives for years to come. Diana Walsh's attempt to humiliate a young teacher had instead revealed the emergence of an educator whose unique combination of skills and character would transform not just one classroom, but an entire approach to learning and growth. Sometimes the most powerful victories are won not through dominance, but through the quiet strength of refusing to back down from what is right. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.